So thank you and welcome to this talk about our collective experience growing and building design culture across organizations and community within open source. A little bit more about Superbloom design. Thank you obviously to our lovely colleagues for encouraging us to spend time on this talk and work. So here, Superbloom is committed to changing who technology serves by leveraging design to shift power. We used to be called Simply Secure, that was our former name, and we're an international team with expertise in research, design, software development, and product management, particularly in the open source space and the privacy and security technology space as well. We're supported by a diverse set of advisors at Superbloom and partners, and we've been working on internet freedom topics, human-centered design, censorship circumvention, and public interest technology since the founding of Simply Secure, our previous name, in 2015. The kinds of things that we work on at Simply Secure, to give you a little bit more of an idea of the kinds of projects we're working on, we've worked on lots of design for user-oriented technology with high-risk communities and people with high-risk identities in remote, hard-to-reach, poorly connected regions. We've worked on user onboarding processes for decentralized apps and decentralized systems. We've worked on a lot of projects around how funders can better understand the sustainability and how design relates to the critical digital infrastructure of open source and beyond. And more recently, I finished up a project with the OpenSSF over at the Linux Foundation around how to better understand how software developers and people using packages from package repositories understand attestation information and security information about the packages and the supply chain of the package repositories, their packages that they're installing. So that's Superbloom. A little bit more about me. Thank you for the lovely intro. So yeah, 15 plus years in design and UX. That's both proprietary and commercial space, as well as moving into open source for around 7 years now. I've been at Superbloom Design for 4 years. I'm the core maintainer over at opensourcedesign.net, which Scott, thank you for mentioning opensourcedesign.net. Opensourcedesign.net is dedicated to helping open source software projects get better design in their projects. We're here to be a source of support and communication for open source projects, and also designers for when they want to explore open source software and begin to contribute to open source software. We do things like maintaining a community call where people can come and ask questions, share the kind of work that they're working on, and thankfully every year since we've been applying, we've had a FOSDEM dev room for open source design, which has always been really well received over there. You also might recognize my voice from the Sustain podcast. If you're familiar with the Sustain open source software podcast, I'm a host over there as well. Over to you, Victory.
Hi, my name is Victory Brown, and I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. So thank you to the Canonical team for bringing me over here. I have 4 years OSS experience in design, but I'm not just limiting my contributions to design, because for me, design is how things work. So when I get into an open source community, I find a way to make things better. And just like Scott said, I'm trying not to overdo it, just, just a little. Also a design researcher at Superbloom Design, which Eriol has talked about. And back home in Nigeria, I'm an OSS design advocate, or just an OS advocate. We talk about how Africans can contribute to open source and use open source as a way to, educate ourselves and also build our skills as well. I also do a lot of community building work as a community manager and a programs lead. I also help to plan some OSS events, and I join sometimes on the Sustain podcast as a host. Today we're going to talk about building and bridging design contributions, and the first way to start is, what does OSS design mean? How is it done? And how do we document it? I think Eriol and I are going through a different route this time. We're going to have 2 different slides. One is what we think through our experience and perspective, how OSS projects think about design. And then the next one is how we as design contributors think about design. And then we have the general one. First off, from the OSS perspective, most projects think that OSS design contributions are clear, small, actionable design proposals that can be implemented at a go. Change our icons, fix our logos, let us have like a swag design and all of that. They also think design contributions are one-off, which you see a lot on our open source job boards. People just like, I need a designer for this, and then there's a stipend attached or there's a gratis. But that's not how we think about design. In my experience, design, it goes deeper than that. Like I said, when I started, design is how things work. So whenever I get into a space, I always figure out like what's not working and how can I design a better experience for that. So designers want a chance to apply user experience research to UI to improve OSS workflows and make interfaces more approachable for users and new contributors. Sometimes when OSS projects say they want one thing, when a designer gets in there, they find out that that one thing is not the need at that particular time. And I think that's what a lot of projects are afraid to open up to because they don't know how to go about designing deeper than what they need. So they just stick to designing logos. And honestly, logos are not going to improve your user experience, and logos are not going to bring more users to your project. So you need more design thinking solutions and more deeper research to fix whatever issues it is. So we think about design as wanting transparency on product goals, constraints, and user goals to design better experience. This does not mean that we want to intrude into your processes. We just want you to be open about what we can help you do and what you need help with. Because, like I said, sometimes it's not very clear between the project owners and the designers what needs to be done. And because we are full flowing creatives, we get into this and we think deeper. We also think that design is getting community feedback and input to design a better tooling experience. Open source is collaborative, right? And sometimes these developments, and with my experience building communities, a lot of the communities that have been built for open source projects are typically just for the users or community members to use and give feedback on the tools. So they build communities of testers and not really like community members who they want to listen to and who they want to build for. But with the help of designers, we can do this. We don't need user data. There are other ways designers go about finding and conducting research to, improve products. So we want to be more involved in the product development cycle. We don't want to come in when there's an issue to be fixed. We want to be there from the onset. My first project contributing to open source, I was given like a documentation and I had zero knowledge about those technical terms, and I had to break that down and then describe it visually. So I worked more on understanding. I had different calls with the community members and the developers to, create a more graphics that explains what the project is about. So kind of like an infographic of some sort. So what does OSS design mean in general? OSS design or designing for OSS means making choices that improve usability, accessibility, and open software tool experience using open processes. So basically applying open source principles to design processes. I think Red Hat describes, they have like a 9 principle for open source, what open source processes are, and one of them is duocracy. We have community participation, and that's what we think design should be. Community members and the entire design team or members of the community should be involved in this process. Now, when you get to that bridge and you get stuck, that's when the designer comes in to break down that relationship and how that collaboration can be done easily. The next thing we think is it's a practice of shaping user experience tools and processes in community-driven environments. It's also both product design, which is the UX UI, as Scott said, and then process design flow. So we're not just UX UI designers. We don't just do icons. We don't just do logos. We design experiences, which are more in-depth, where you have to talk about the needs and you have to be empathetic. You have to know who you're building for, what they would use it. Because sometimes when you build these things, you think of it to go in a certain way, and then when people interact with it, they use it in a certain way. And sometimes you don't have those clarity, and it's very important that you do. And successful OSS design is collaborative, and that's what we're trying to pitch to you, that you should be more open with your design process because design is collaborative. How do you design in OSS? Like I said earlier, it's basically the application of open source principles to design processes. So one, you design in the open, sharing your processes, prototypes, and decisions publicly on Slack channel, during team meetings, having that conversation with your community is very important. That's what the openness of designing in OSS means. You're designing for community experience. It's about shaping how people interact with the project, contribution flows, onboarding documentation, and tone. I think in my whole journey of contributing to open source as a designer, I've worked on a lot of onboarding projects. I've helped to add onboarding guides for designers to technical documentation, and not just about the documentation itself, but more about the experience of community members, how they get feedback, who they get feedback from. All of those things can be communicated on your documentation wherever it is housed. Designing collaboratively means working asynchronously with developers, maintainers, and users. And like I said earlier, a lot of these design conversations are happening between the designers and design team, and then they hand off to developers, and whatever goes on from there is not communicated. And we're trying to, reduce that gap. We want to see a lot of collaboration. So invite us to your meetings. Sometimes we don't understand all of the technical terms, but we understand the experience, and we're able to communicate that. And we always ask good questions as researchers. So it doesn't matter what the conversation is about. A designer is always going to ask a clarifying question that brings of something that's very important for us. So designing for longevity, rather. OSS projects evolve slowly. Good design practices outlast individual contributors. So when you have a designer in your project, you're designing way ahead of time, way ahead of you. Sometimes designers always leave projects. We leave projects because sometimes we're not welcome. There are other reasons that makes us leave a project. But when we contribute with the mindset that this design goes before us, after us, even in our absence. And that's what we're trying to also say. So what does it mean to document design within OSS? Who is responsible, and where should design documentation live?
You have to press it hard.
Oh, thank you.
Usability.
Yeah. So from the OSS project perspective, what OSS projects think design documentation is basically a single source of truth. It's either on the README project or somewhere on their website that says read our docs. And sometimes it's not very clear to non-designers or other users who just want to download and install. Some of those documentation are very technical, which not your fault because they're actually written by a technical writer or a developer who is very technical. But designers could simplify those processes, simplify those terms, and maybe not just simplify the terms, but we could also add graphics with our understanding, because these days information is consumed in different forms. People assimilate information in different formats. So if they're not able to read the text, they could watch a video, they could see infographics. So all of those things are ways that you can make room for designers to contribute to your project. From our perspective, what does design documentation look like? Good documentation isn't just for clarity, it is for advocacy, and that's very important to me because a lot of my open source design contributions is basically standing up on pulpits like this or stages like this and say, hey, make room for designers, hey, make room for designers. So good documentation reduces a bit of this might work because designers can find projects and then they know that they can contribute as a designer to that project. Also, it's about being clear. Good advocacy kind of tells the story of your project. You don't have to, or good documentation rather, you don't have to always do this. Good documentation does storytelling on behalf of the project. So document what they did. We see documentation as documenting what we did and how it can be used, and also who we're working for, what problems we're solving, because you might not always get developers on your project. Some people just stumble, some users who have zero technical background just stumble on projects, and then they get very confused. Even if it's what they need, they really don't know because there's no way to find out. So we simplify that. We would explain, we will talk about this in a way that is very clear. And it says when you contribute to a project for a long time, you kind of lose the sense of what it feels like to contribute to a new project. So you're used to this. It doesn't mean anything to you at this point because you've been here for 10 years, 15 years. But someone who's just new, like I was when I joined the Linux Foundation, it was really chaotic for me. I had to jump on calls with every single developer that I could find and who was available to me to, break down that technicality and enough for me to understand. It wasn't very clear, but it was good enough. Why is design documentation important? It keeps design visible. It builds continuity, and it helps non-designers understand value, and it protects design from being reduced to aesthetics. We're not focused on aesthetics at all. We do deeper work, we design research, we talk to people, and we try to make things better. Where do OSS designers want design documents to live? We wanted to leave where it's easy for us to find. And this is not as, it doesn't sound as crazy as it looks. You can document design in any way, and you don't have to make a separate documentation for design. All of it can be in one documentation, but then you have to, give us a different category or some other tab where we can find our own design documentations. At Chaos, we use Figma for design documentations. There are other ways design can be documented, video format on YouTube and linked somewhere on your documentation. It can also be like a Google Doc that is pinned on Slack. So whichever way, we just want to be able to find it and want to also feel like we are part of a project and there's always room for us. Over to Errol.
Just to wrap up some of what you're talking about here, Victory, I know that perhaps as Victory's been speaking, you've been hearing a lot of proprietary commercial tools and not a lot of open source alternatives, of which there are obviously many. There are alternatives to Google Docs, there are alternatives to Figma. And I think this raises a really interesting point around the documentation aspect for designers, is that designers are typically coming from a perspective that is not embedded in open source. We have to learn and be introduced and be welcomed and invited into the alternative open source tooling space. And we really do rely on y'all who have been in the open source space for a lot longer building tools to be welcoming and to introduce us to those tools and alternatives, rather than perhaps assuming that we should know that already or could know that already. We do a lot of work in our community to try and introduce designers to these alternatives.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really implore you as people within the open source space, please be ready and willing to mentor designers just in the general aspects of open source, like what is open source, where did it come from, what are the alternatives, how do you even install something, what's a readme? There are all these things that we learn for the first time, but the first reason why we come into open source is, oh, we really want to work on something cool. And then we get like, well, you need to go read the manual. That's not really the best way to invite designers. And again, I know it can sound pretty scary that designers are here to ask lots of questions and have calls and be really involved. It's because we're innately curious. We're there to help you try and make your work better. We're there to improve things alongside you. And we don't typically do that to be like difficult or take up a lot of your time, but it's because we really want to help. But we don't have that knowledge of going and finding our own solutions through documentation. So yeah. Okay, so let's talk about design involvement across internal organizations, teams, and across open source communities. So I've got only sort of one story about how I did this in an organization, an open source organization I was part of. So I've built and sustained a number of different designers in open source projects, large and small, across my years. Consistency is key, essentially. As much consistency as you are able to do within an open source project, because I know consistency isn't always available, especially if it's a hobby project or a project with fewer maintainers, but consistency is key for making sure that you attract designers into your project and keep them, because they are very aware of how active they consider your project to be. And it's even as small as saying, hey, we do this much about this amount of the time, that can help designers really understand, oh, okay, people are still here and doing things, because they're not necessarily going to look in the commits. That's not where designers are going to, oh, I should look in the commits to know whether this is active. That's really not where designers
or the GitHub issues.
Yeah, it's not where designers are going to first go. So in 2020, I built up a design contributor team of about 15 to 20 different designer contributors across the globe over the course of 4 months of my entire role at the Open Food Network. The Open Food Network is an open source platform for people, farmers, small people that are growing food, to sell their food local supply chain style. It's a really great tool. I love the Open Food Network. Growing those design teams, it was hard. It wasn't perfect at all. It took plenty of effort and energy, but was ultimately successful for me, the lead designer on the open source project at Open Food Network. So the main perspectives of the open source project, though. So the open source project, they very much had a perspective of, well, we pay you to work on design issues. You're contracted here as the lead designer to work on design issues. Any time that you're spending growing your design contributor base, you're not progressing issues. And so there was a real tension between the time that I was paid, what was my time, paid time going towards. So when my contract ended, who would continue to support these design volunteers? What would that look like? Would I stick around? Do I want to stick around? Do I have to stick around just because I built the first part of it? Is there a way to leave a really good way of other designers coming in to take up the mantle? But they did assume that the designers would just leave when I did, and they were really concerned about what they needed to learn internally, they as in the people that were maintaining the code, the product management, the funding, all of the aspects. They were like, well, what do we need to know in order to help this continue? Would another worry, which I guess maybe is something that many open source maintainers are worried about, would any dev issues progress if the designers outnumbered the developers? Because it was believed that designers don't work fast, and it was believed in a lot of places that designers complicate technology projects by asking questions, by making sure that things are being designed in a way that's going to be useful for the most users. And something I kind of wanted to add to what Scott was saying. Have people heard of this phrase, measure twice, cut once? So doing design is like you've got a woodcraft project, you're cutting some paper. Doing design and design research is like measuring twice and cutting once. You don't want to measure once, cut, and then have to throw it away because you've done the wrong size. Or have a wobbly bookcase or whatever you end up having. Nobody wants to install a wobbly bookcase on their operating system. Anyway, so to put it plainly, the growth of design contributors worried and really scared the project. And I think that's normal and natural. If anyone's feeling a little like uneasy or tense about design contributions, that's really normal, that's really natural, because it's very new, I think, to open source. At least the energy, the high level of energy of design coming into open source. But the main thing is that the fear came from a place of care. They cared about the experience of all contributors, not just the coders, but the designers. They didn't want the designers to have the bad experience as well, or either. Here's a few screenshots of some of the things that we did there. You can see I was using a proprietary tool to organize things because designers found it better, but you can see how I was checking in the different designers working on different projects here. I was having design bi-weekly check-ins with all the different contributors at different times because obviously distributed remote. We were talking about our processes, how to size issues, how to do design QA, what does design acceptance criteria look like, and a lot of that was bringing in the rest of the designers into the things that I thought would be great for an open source project to do as far as processes go. You can find a video on YouTube about how I did the onboarding for designers specifically. I really encourage you to look at that. That's all my setup and how I would onboard designers into the project. I'm going to have to speed up because of time. So from the design perspective, I was able to balance work and team building, but managing designers in open source is really, really difficult even as a designer. The learning curve, like I talked about, of open source and mentoring was hugely difficult. But the benefits of having collaborators that I, as the sole designer on the open source project, had through these volunteers was huge. Because one designer on a project can be an echo chamber of opinion or their experience. And the more that you invite in, the more experience you get for your open source project. There was also the worry that I wouldn't have time or be available to contribute and sharing knowledge and building interest with other designers, and making sure that the project always had options for design involvement was really, really tricky. So designers have lots of different things they want to contribute. Making sure there was lots of variety for them was really, really tricky for me to make sure, especially since we had product roadmaps and funded roadmaps. And working fast and sustainably are really two different things. The design tooling for open source is not quite there yet. It's improving more and more. And regardless of the number of volunteers involved, having methods for fast design can exist, but they're really difficult to do within the existing infrastructure of open source. We don't really have, like, I think I was talking to somebody recently, good ways of it including like design documented video files in, say, GitHub issues and things like that. And the ways that we communicate are slightly different. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the workshop work that I've done globally, and then we're going to finish out. So I've done over 10 global design contribution workshops over 5 years. This is what I think works and this is what I think doesn't work. When you're thinking about doing contribution workshops, both with open source developers, teaching them how to do design contributions, and designers with no open source experience, teaching them to make their first open source contributions to a project. Again, there's some links at the bottom for repositories of open templates as well to check out. So since 2019, I've been researching and design hacking on these contribution workshops, both for the designers and the developers. And here's what I've learned through doing those workshops. Just a little picture of all the different workshops over the years. Some in Taipei, some in Japan, some in Nigeria, some in the US, in Seattle and Berlin. I've done a number of different workshops over different places. And what designers are as a function is often a translator, a tour guide, a facilitator. And as a designer that's got experience in open source, what I did in these workshops and what I would recommend that you'll do if you want to make a design contribution workshop is a designer that can be a facilitator for those designers coming in, learning about open source for the first time, like how to ask questions, or anybody that's willing to be that facilitator, that question answerer, that person that can investigate and help like onboard them in those moments of the workshop. I first started doing these when I worked at Ushahidi. Ushahidi is an open source crowdsourcing platform based in Kenya, and they were the first open source organization that helped me pilot these workshops. So, from the open source perspective, used to coders that mostly follow a normalized format, which is use a software, find a bug, fix the bug, well, log the bug, fix the bug themselves, or fix a different bug. They're used to, open source projects, from what I know, are used to that self-serve contribution. They know that this is pretty much a given. For designers, it's very different. If they're using the open source, they may not have understand or have done the process of finding a bug and logging a bug, and so finding the things that they need to work on is very, very different. So as I was saying, the self-serve model for designers is very, very different. So one of the things that I do in these workshops is make sure that there's predetermined tasks for them to contribute to. Sustaining design contributions is really important. So and maintaining the involvement post-workshop takes investment. And yes, the learning gap between design methods and open source. So what kinds of design to expect and what kind of things you might need to learn in order to welcome them. Last slide. At the contribution workshops, designers and developers, they get a chance to collaborate and discuss and explore and ask questions about the open source and the purpose and needs. This collaboration has like a positive community benefit generally for both the open source and the designers. Mm-hmm. And for designers, the first interaction with an open source project is typically a human one. It's asking questions, it's an interaction. If you want to have designers contributing, there needs to be a human element because that's really what we study is human interaction. It helps us connect to the humans behind the projects and feel included. And then if you can be at the maintainers and representatives from the open source project at the design contribution workshops, it's huge. So being able to answer those questions as a user, I've used this in this way, is a really real huge benefit to these design contribution workshops. But again, you can find more information on the links. With that, I'm a little over time, I'm so sorry, but we also published a huge study about how designers contribute to open source software. If you want to read a research study funded by Ocean, the Vermont Complex Systems Lab over at Vermont University. And yeah, please read that and contact us if you have any more questions.